You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Okay, can you guys hear? What's going on here? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Okay, can you guys hear me now? I don't know what's going on. First is a computer update. Now my OBS studio is doing something. Couldn't hear sound. Now I see the meters are moving for my mic. Are you guys hearing me? All right, cool. Sounds like I'm on a motorcycle. Okay, what's going on here? All right, give me another second to try fix this. All right. Okay, this still sounds pretty bad, right? Let's see. Copy filters. Okay, what about now? How does it sound now? Has the sound improved now? All right. Hopefully that sounds better. I don't know what's going on here. But anyway. We're here again. Last night I had issues with the computer updating at a inopportune time. So I apologize for those of you who were waiting around for that episode. I also want to thank you guys for taking the time to wait around in hopes that we did the episode last night. I appreciate y'all. Tonight we're going to read this paper on romance, parenthood, and gender in a modern African society by Daniel Jordan Smith of Brown University. Before I read the paper, though, as I see the pro-black perspective is in the chat room, along with NYC Beauties, Kevin Care 42, and Thabo. Thanks to you guys for being here tonight. I also see where, in seeing the pro-black perspective, I'm reminded to remind you guys that this show is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. You guys should be checking out the other shows on KWAZ Radio. There's some good stuff coming from the Queen's Council these days. There's always good stuff coming from the Harsh Reality Podcast and the Pro-Black Perspective. Make sure you guys check out those shows as well. So let's get into the paper. The abstract says, young Igbo men and women in Nigeria increasingly insist on choosing their marriage partners, and ideas about love are shaping Igbo constructions of marriage. But the viability of marriage still depends on fertility. This article examines the divergent consequences for men and women as they negotiate the transition from the role of romantic lover that now commonly characterizes courtship to the roles of mother and father embedded in webs of kinship that characterize marriage. Igbo, Nigeria, marriage, courtship, gender, fertility, love, those are the key words for this paper. So, young Igbo men and women in Nigeria are far more likely than their parents and grandparents to insist on choosing their marriage partners. Before I go any further, let me ask the chat room a question. What has been y'all's thought on marriages where the persons getting married are chosen by family members, like the arranged marriage? Like, what is your feelings about arranged marriages traditionally and in this modern time? How do you feel about it? As always, put your answers in the chat. I'll read them off on air. Increasingly, notions of romantic love and emotional intimacy are important criteria for selecting a spouse. Changes in patterns of courtship, the growing importance of Christian wedding ceremonies, and trends towards establishing urban residences with nuclear household organization mobilize and reinforce an emerging model of marriage that emphasizes the personal relationship between husband and wife. Ideals of romance, conjugality, and companionship are shaping Igbo constructs of marriage. So that line there would suggest that prior, right, for the Igbo, there was no romance, really, right? And it wasn't about companionship, etc. Right? So again, I asked that question, how do you guys feel about that construct? But to achieve their social and economic goals, Igbo people continue to rely on and face tremendous obligations to their kinspeople and Afans. Though the selection of marriage partners is increasingly a matter of individual choice, the stability and sustainability of marriage still depends, above all, on fertility. This article explores the dynamic tensions created as Igbo men and women adjust to the transition from the role of romantic lover that now often characterizes courtship to the roles of mother and father embedded in webs of kinship that characterize marriage. In particular, it examines the divergent consequences for men and women as gender roles are renegotiated when courtship and love become marriage and parenthood. That brings us to this section called Romantic Love and Marriage in West Africa. The question of whether romantic love is universal has intrigued anthropologists and other cross-cultural researchers for a long time. Standard cross-cultural sample looking for the existence or absence of romantic love in ethnographic data collected from nearly 200 cultures. They preface their study with the assertion, quote, "The anthropological study of romantic or passionate love is virtually non-existent due to the widespread belief that romantic love is unique to Euro-American culture. Underlying these Eurocentric views is the assumption that modernization and the rise of individualism are directly linked to the appearance of romantic notions of love. Defining romantic love as, quote unquote, any intense attraction that involves the idealization of the other within an erotic context with the expectation of enduring for some time in the future. Janko Wake and Fisher, 1992, conclude from their analysis that romantic love is a cross-cultural universal, or at least that it is nearly universal. They stress, however, that even if some form of romantic love is nearly universal across cultures, there is a need to understand, quote, its emic manifestations within a variety of cultural settings. Like other scholars, Janko Wake and Fisher distinguish between romantic love, which is defined as passionate and erotic, and what they call, quote unquote, companionship love, which emerges with an enduring relationship. Questions about the definition of love and beyond this essay's scope. Instead, it aims to examine the ways in which ideas and expectations about love are implicated in the social construction of marriage in contemporary Igbo-speaking Nigeria. More specifically, it explores how the contemporary construction of marriage articulates with continuities and changes in Igbo social organization, particularly with regard to the importance of kinship and fertility. Evidence from Nigeria and across Africa indicates that Africans are increasingly likely to select marriage partners based at least in part on whether they are in love. This almost feels weird to read about. I mean, maybe it's just me, but it almost feels like it feels a little bit odd to read about this. It's like, it feels like, you know, when you hear the guys observing the near extinct panda bear or something like that, right? There they are, fornicating. Like, you know, it's just weird. Like you're watching these animals get it in, and you know they're near extinct or whatever. In the chat room, Kevin Care42 says that's asking for a disaster. You have to find someone compatible. You have to find someone compatible. So I guess the disaster comment is about, what do you think about the old traditions of what's it called again? Arranged marriages, right? Yeah, I mean, but the question is, are we thinking about this stuff in a Eurocentric way? Is it Eurocentric, as this paper sort of suggested early on? Is it Eurocentric to think about marriage in terms of you know, emotions and not from a practical perspective, right? And how we become conditioned to think of it from an emotional, you know, an emotional space, as as opposed to a more practical space. The emergence of romantic love as a criterion in mate selection and the increasing importance of conjugality, for example, a couple's personal relationship to each other, in marriage relationships, do not mean that romantic love itself has only recently emerged in Africa. When I asked elderly Igbos about their betrothals, their marriage, and about love, they related personal stories and popular fables that indicated a long tradition of romantic love. Many men and women confess that they would have married a person other than their spouse had they been allowed to, quote-unquote, follow the heart. Scholars have documented the existence of romantic love in Africa long before it became a widely accepted criterion for marriage. Ushendu, in 1965, confirms the existence of passionate love in his study of concubinage in traditional Igbo society. Right? Again, concubinage in traditional Igbo society. All right, so is that idea a Euro idea again? Interestingly, both men and women were accorded significant institutionalized extramarital sexual freedom, and a related proverb survives to the present. Sweetness is deepest among lovers. Put that on a shirt on the dog. I'm gonna tell someone's lady that in the near future. Sweetness is deepest amongst lovers. As Obichina, 1973 notes, quote, the question is not whether love and sexual attraction as normal human traits exist within Western and African societies, but how they are woven into the fabric of life, end of quote. Exactly when Africans in general and Igbos in particular began to conceptualize marriage choices in more individualistic terms, privileging romantic love as a criterion in the selection of a spouse is hard to pinpoint. Some parts of Igbo land and in many parts of West Africa, the social acceptance of individual choice in mate selection is still just beginning. Certainly, these changes occurred first in urban areas among relatively educated and elite populations. Obichina's 1973 study of Onitsha pamphlet literature indicates that popular Nigerian literature about love, romance, and modern marriage began to emerge just after World War II. Historical accounts suggest that elements of modern marriage began even early in the 20th century. By the 1970s, monographs about modern marriage in West Africa appeared. In contemporary Igbo land, the majority of young people choose their own spouses, and the expectation to do so is almost universal among those still in school. But as indicated above, ethnographic data from Igbo-speaking Nigeria suggests that the stability and success of marriage remain embedded in webs of kinship and dependent upon fertility. While individual choice is increasingly privileged in the selection of spouses, extended families still have a good deal of influence in the process, and their support and approval remain critical for most marriages to succeed. Once a couple is married, collective interest in the marriage focuses on their fertility, with successful parenthood still valued as the defining attribute of full personhood. While parenthood remains critical for the stability and success of a marriage, much of the rest of the marital relationship is negotiable. It depends on both modern and traditional scripts. This article explores these factors as a window onto larger patterns of continuity and change in Nigerian social and demographic regimes. So again, I pause and I ask the question, right? I'm thinking out loud. What's better, to go with your emotion that's pretty random in a sense, right, and love on someone who, you know, yeah, she could have kids, but as the children's first teacher, is she capable? Right? And as Only Say talked about in an episode of his show a couple of weeks back, as the primary healer, secondary protector, is she capable? Right? Do you just go with the emotion, with the romantic feeling, or is it more sensible to look at what the union really means? You know, back in the day, if you read certain texts, you'll see where people brought land, and, you know, again, they were in a farming society, so they brought land and seeds and animals and, you know, etc. Right? And that's how you built your wealth, essentially. Right? So should people more so look at it as a way to build strong Africans going forward, right? And also build wealth for those Africans as well going forward, right? You know, I'm thinking along the lines of nation building now. What's the best approach? Is it emotion, or is it what's more beneficial? So this brings us to a section of paper called Modern Marriage and Social Transformation in Africa. Anthropologists have long portrayed changes in the criteria and process of mate selection as reflective of profound transformations in the social organization of African societies. In particular, individual choice in the selection of marriage partners and the emergence of conjugality as an important dimension of marriage dynamics are associated with the breakdown of collective, kinship-oriented systems of production and reproduction. A half-century ago, in an introduction to a classic study of African marriage and family life, Phillips, 1969, wrote, "In attempting an analysis of modern trends, mention should perhaps first be made of the diminishing importance of the collective or group aspect of marriage. Emphasis is shifting to the individual aspect of marriage as a relationship between two persons. The traditional function of the marriage relationship as a continuing bond between two kinship groups is being lost to view. The developments referred to above are attributable to a combination of factors which cannot be examined in detail here, but which may broadly be comprehended under the term, quote-unquote, culture contact." So if you go back in your memory, you know that there was a couple episodes, a few months ago, we discussed the African structure of society, right? Being a Ubuntu society, it's about the collective, it's about the group. And it is interesting how the change in how the group goes about marriage kind of reflects the change in how the group deals with itself as a collective, right? So when you see folks being more individualistic, choosing their own mate, as opposed to the group having a say, right? Having a duty within choosing your partner, your marriage partner, you know, we see that more and more individuals in African societies are becoming more individualistic, right? Which goes against the traditional African nature. And if that's true, and you know, based on what I said earlier, then that means that folks are going against even building up community power, are kind of going against the fundamentals of what really makes strong, you know, what would really make a strong African nation. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Demographers have also focused on changing patterns of marriage and family organization as key processes in social transformation. Emerging, expected, and delayed changes in marriage and family structure associated in the demographic literature with Africa's incipient fertility transition. Demographers have sought to explain and predict declines or stability in African fertility based on changes or stasis in the structure of family organization. Characterizing the overall thrust of theorizing about fertility patterns in developing countries, what a name, Lesthagi in 1989 writes that it is, quote, the concept of westernization, that is the penetration of Western ideals among the conjugal family, which provide a direction for family change in the third world. The shift towards nuclear residence patterns for households, and especially towards European-like conjugal marriage, is seen as taking place either because corporate kinship systems or extended families are too rigid and curtail individual freedom, or because their economic basis is gradually being withdrawn. Both the early anthropological literature and the demographic literature focus attention on the penetration of Western ideals and patterns of family organization. But Lesthagi in 1989 rightly cautions that Africans are not simply adapting and reproducing Western family structures. Rather, quote, African populations are currently producing their own versions of new systems that are still far from crystallized. Let me check something real quick. All right. As indicated above, a good deal of the early evidence for the rise of romantic love and the transformation of marriage into a more conjugal relationship in Africa focus on urban populations, particularly the urban elite. Several analysis of the transformation of marriage drew on evidence from popular media and literature, such as letters to editors and advice columns in popular African magazines. The content of such popular literature suggests, and the analysis concur, that major changes have been taking place for several decades in the social construction of African marriage. But as the words of many of the letter writers indicate, Africans are not simply abandoning traditional practices in favor of modern ones. Okay. But are creating their own systems of marriage and family organization that use resources of the past and the present, negotiating the tensions that emerge and drawing on both traditional and modern moralities as they see fit. Processes of social reproduction and social transformation are mutually implicated, such that modern African marriages are both new and embedded in long-standing social and cultural systems. The relative influence of the old and the new varies at different points in the life course. In processes of mate selection and the unfolding of marriage relationships in contemporary Igbo society, there are striking contrasts between the dynamics of courtship and marriage. Courtship most often privileges the nature of a couple's personal relationship and is negotiated through interpersonal intimacy and expressions of love. In contrast, marriage tends to be constructed within the framework of continuing ties and obligations to extended family and community, privileging fertility and the social roles of mother and father. While modern courtship fosters a more egalitarian gender dynamic, modern marriage reinforces a more patriarchal hierarchy. Neither men nor women are passive actors in these processes. They deploy strategies from traditional and modern value systems to achieve their goals and negotiate their positions within relationships. But most striking is the continued importance of fertility and parenthood. While most conceptualizations of the relationship between changes in the structure of marriage and the value of fertility have made fertility the dependent variable,
The evidence presented here suggests that the direction of influence may run the other way as well. Even as mate selection, marriage and family structures seem to be changing in ways that are typically described as Western or modern. The extent of those changes and the gender dynamics that emerge are highly sensitive to the continuing value of parenthood and fertility. The persistent value of fertility is itself explainable in part in terms of continuities and the importance of corporate kinship groups, even in modern African contexts. This essay suggests that the social value of parenthood may be an independent variable in the process of marriage and family formation, and not simply a dependent outcome. So let's jump out of the scientific for a second. And let's talk about experiences, right? Let's talk about the experiences you guys have had. If you don't mind being forthcoming. When you folks have dealt in relationships, right, that have not worked out, what do you think was the biggest issue in those relationships? And let's frame it, even though this paper is suggesting that it's not really a factor. Let's frame it in terms of Western ideology. What do you think Western ideologies had to do in your poor relationships in the past? Or maybe let's not say poor relationships in the past, but in your relationships in the past that didn't work out, what do you think Western philosophy did in your relationship? What do you think, Western philosophy has done to you per se, or to the person you were with, that made it so that these relationships don't work out? Put your comments in the chat. I'll read them live on air. This brings us to a section of the paper called Setting. The ethnographic data on courtship and marriage presented here come from fieldwork conducted from 1995 to 1997 in the Igbo-speaking southeastern Nigerian community of Ubakala, as well as 3 years living and working in the Igbo-speaking town of Owerri from 89 to 92. In Ubakala, as in most Igbo communities, a huge portion of young men and women leave to live in Nigeria's many cities and towns. Massive levels of out-migration and the extent to which migrants retain links with and bring home the influences of the wider world assure that Igbo communities are globalized villages. Approximately 93% of men and 75% of women resident in Ubakala during fieldwork had lived more than 1 year in a city or town, and 3 out of 4 adults had at least one relative living in Lagos, Nigeria's megacity. Among migrants, ties and obligations to their extended families and communities of origin remain powerful, creating what Berry in 1985 has called quote-unquote extended communities. But though they retain ties to their home communities, migrants also encounter a diverse population of Nigerians, meeting people from far away with whom they often strike up romance, pursue courtship, and sometimes seek marriage. My research suggests that patterns of courtship and marriage differ little between towns and villages. Couples who meet at home are increasingly likely to frame their relationship in personal terms. Couples who meet in the city go through a long process of informing and involving their families and communities in the marriage process. Very few Igbos cut ties to their families, and the obligations to kin can be a constant burden, even when couples establish nuclear households hundreds of miles from home. Though urban residents are likely to be more modern in the sense that conjugal household dynamics prevail more completely, few Igbo marriages are unaffected by the influence of extended families. Most interesting, despite the modern orientation of all young Igbos, whether in the villages or the cities, they joined the older generations to collectively share and enforce traditional values about fertility. So that brings us to a section called Igbo courtship and marriage. In the chat room, I see there's been some activity. Kevin Care42 says incompatibility to my question. We had nothing in common. She wanted an 8-carat diamond engagement ring. This was Western materialism. Yeah, I could see that. That's the common story in the West, right? Does anyone else have their own version of that answer? It'll be interesting to see how many of us have the similar response, right? How many of us differ and how. So please post your comments in the chat room, and we'll get to it live on air. So Igbo courtship and marriage. Chinyere Wanquo met her husband Ike in the town of Owerri in southeastern Nigeria, where she attended a teacher's college after completing secondary school in her village community. Ike was 8 years her senior and a building contractor, successful enough to own a used car, a prized symbol of wealth and success. On their first date, he took her to the disco at the Concord Hotel, at that time the fanciest in town. In addition to being educated, Chinyere was a beautiful young woman and consequently had many suitors. Her courtship with Ike lasted almost 2 years. During that time, they often dined out and went dancing together. Among the more memorable events of their courtship were a weekend outing to the Nike Lake Resort near Enugu, and a trip to Lagos during which they attended a performance by Fela Kuti, a famous Nigerian musician. During their courtship, each bought the other birthday cards, and for Ike's birthday, Chinyere baked a cake. They went to many social events together and acknowledged to their peers that they were a couple. Not long into their courtship, Chinyere and Ike began sleeping together. Prior to approaching Chinyere's people and his own family about their getting married, Ike proposed to Chinyere. They agreed together to get married and then began the process of including their families. On its face, Ike and Chinyere's story is not as different from a contemporary Western courtship. Both Ike and Chinyere said that it was because they fell in love and they decided to get married. Even her attraction to his wealth and his attraction to her beauty and her good education seemed to fit models Westerners have about the basis for marriage. But in many ways, their story is quite different because of the change it represents in Nigerian mate selection and because of transformations that take place once they are married. When you guys listen to the reading of Ike and Chinyere's story, is that what you guys think is a common story of courtship and marriage? Igbos are generally patrilineal, and marriage is lineage exogamous. Traditionally, marriages created alliances across nearby communities and were mostly arranged by families. Among those over 60 years old, stories of mate selection typically included a memory of the time when one's father or mother pointed out a young man or a young woman or man and said, quote unquote, that will be your spouse. Just like that, right? Even in the days when arranged marriages were taken for granted, this was a frightening and awesome moment. Almost all old people, whether male or female, could narrate in great detail the moment they found out about their betrothal. Elder Igbo said that both men and women have always had the right to refuse marriage partners. But social pressure to meet community and family expectations made that difficult. That's an interesting point there, right? Interesting point. They've always had the right to refuse, right? Memories of girls who ran away to avoid a particular marriage, or men who defied their parents and married the woman of their choice, demonstrate that a tension between arranged marriage and personal preferences has long existed. Popular fables and myths often recount men and women who acted out of love and defied family and community demands. In some stories, the protagonists end up as heroes or heroines. In many others, their defiance serves to explain their ill fate. These stories, both those that are true and those that are apocryphal, show that the idea of love predates the growing acceptance that marriage should be based on it. But they also demonstrate the power of cultural norms that insist marriage is very much the business of kinship groups and communities, and not simply a private affair between consenting individuals. The traditional Igbo marriage ceremonies involve hundreds of people from and associated with the lineages of the bride and groom, extended negotiations over bride wealth, a host of obligatory exchanges, and the tremendous cooperating between the two kin groups instill the respect and mutual obligations that characterize affinal relationships in Igbo land. For those who attend an Igbo marriage ceremony, and certainly for the couple getting married, there can be no doubt that many people are invested in the marriage. One of the good things, and this is me talking for a second, one of the good things about what I just read about all the people who are invested from both lineages, right, in the marriage. The good thing about it is, if you're following through with the idea, is that when you start to have children, the children have, quote unquote, the village to raise them. And honestly, and those of you, I'm not sure about here in the States, but I know, and as a matter of fact, I think at one time here in the States it was like that too. I don't know about now, but I know in the continent, in the Caribbean, we had really the whole neighborhood raised you, right? If you were doing some dumb stuff, people will call you by your surname, right? Your family name, and tell you, hey, that's some dumb stuff you're doing there. You know, go home, you know, or whatever. So you had the group, you had, you know, grown men who would pull you aside. Say, if you're a young boy, or grown women will pull girls aside and talk to them, kind of, you know, prepare them for what's to come later in life, right? And so, you know, and built into that was like a rites of passage and all, where you had to earn the respect of your elders, right? For them to really mess with you like that, for them to really pull you aside and give you the pertinent talks about life, not just about sex or whatever, but just about life and how to maneuver through life. You know, so that's the benefit of having these choices, these big choices like marriage per se, that unites families, big groups, you know, usually big groups of people, right? Your children then have guidance from these collectives, right? I see in the chat room, KW Don 7 has pulled through. Good to see you, KW Don 7. KW Don 7 says there's no rites of passage. I just talked about that. For Africans in the diaspora with regards to courtship and marriage, we were just thrown out there to figure it out ourselves. Yeah, there's no, it's, you know, it's lacking, right? It's lacking. There's no other way to say it than what KW 7 said and I said earlier. There's no rites of passage in the dating game. And so because we're haphazardly thrown out there, our relationships tend to be haphazard, right? And it's not to say that there's no problems in, you know, in these relationships that we're reading about, but I'm just saying that there's structure. Anytime you start off something with some structure, you know, it tends to proceed structured, right? So something to keep in mind. Let's continue. Traditional Igbo marriage ceremonies involve, today the vast majority of young couples initiate their own marriages. Few marriages are strictly arranged, but the process of actually getting married still includes the extended families and communities of both the man and the woman. Any marriage ceremony without the consent and assistance of kinfolk is impossible. Even among the most modern Igbos of the younger generation, one is not considered really married without Igba and Ku, right? Despite the fact that it is possible to marry legally in the church or court. Although the current generation in most senses does choose its own marriage partners, it is very difficult for Igbos to marry someone to whom their families object. The criteria for approval entail class and ethnic dimensions. It is difficult and rare to marry a non-Igbo. Even in the Igbo diaspora, most people come home to find a mate. We need some Igbo folks up in here, right? We need some Igbo folks up in here to talk about this. Marrying below one's social class is also difficult, but more common. Men find it easier than women to marry beneath them, quote unquote beneath them, because a couple's social class depends mainly on the position of the husband. But the most interesting and conflict-producing restriction in spousal selection has to do with place of origin within Igbo society itself. Traditionally, Igbo people observe specific rules of lineage or village exogamy, but married from among close by neighboring communities with whom they had long-standing ties. Such alliances helped maintain peace between potentially warring communities, created allies in the event of warfare, and facilitated trade networks and relationships upon which the Igbo's economy depended. See, that's what I was talking about before, right? That, you know, the business of marriage. How many people believe in the business of marriage? Is essentially the question I was asking before. I'm asking in a different way. How many of you believe in the business of marriage? Simple yes or no. Currently, these relationships remain important for access to the resources of the nation state and the Nigerian economy. When we talk about nation building, what should we want to see of marriages and nation building? Talking about building a nation. Like recently we were talking about, and KW Don, Kevin Care42 was a part of that conversation. Even going back to the conversation I had, the joint episode I had with the Pro-Black Perspective. Like, when you're talking about nations, and let's say we're aiming for the quote-unquote sub-Saharan African nation, what do you think marriage should look like? Because we know there's an importance to marriage. It's not just I like you, you like me, we're just one happy family type stuff. There's more to it. So what do we want to see from our institution of marriage going forward? In the chat room, there's some activity. KW Don 7 says the idea that an engagement ring should cost 2 months' salary was part of a marketing campaign developed by De Beers Diamonds, founded by Cecil Rhodes, a homophile who pillaged Southern Africa. Yeah, Cecil Rose was a fig. Bringing it back. The pro-black perspective comes through and says, gotta fulfill health, wealth, and life. Pro-black perspective goes on to say, marriage does. So I guess the pro-black perspective only to say is saying that marriage fulfills health, wealth, and life. Okay. Yeah, but and also what KW7 said earlier is quite true. Like this whole idea that Kevin Care 42 brought up, that I gotta spend 2 months, 2 months of my pay, right? Whether that's from profits from my business or you know, proceeds from my job. I gotta pay 2 months of that to get this ring, to give to someone who neither of us probably have done the work, right, to make this thing that we're getting into, this arrangement of sorts, to make this worthwhile. But I'm thinking about what the pro-black perspective says, and I'm not quite sure, I'm not convinced, is what I'll say. I'm not quite sure that marriage fulfills health, wealth, and life. Because again, fundamentally, it comes down to the participants in it, right? It comes down to the participants, and the fact of the matter is, most people aren't really, especially in this day and age, most people aren't really prepared for it, you know? Kevin Care jumps in and says, Western version of marriage is nothing more than legalized prostitution. Woo! You don't get me banned today, boy, but legalized prostitution, I mean, listen, like I was talking to Kevin Care 42 the other day, and you know, you have these strange little sub movements, right? We talked about this briefly the last time we had a discussion. The last time we had a discussion about, you know, these kind of matters, and you know, the issue with those groups is that they tend to have kind of a queer dynamic, and you know, etc. But the idea for why those groups exist, I'm talking MGTOW, and you guys have presented some other ones to me too that I don't remember right now, is that in today's world, and I'm speaking from a male's perspective, if there's a lady here tonight, you know, hop on and speak from the woman's perspective. I'm open to that, but it's a lot of, and I think that's what Kevin Care 42 is kind of getting at. It's a lot it's a lot being asked of a man to give up, right? You're talking about his well-being, his safety, because he's a protector now. You know, you're talking about his, you know, financially, because he's a provider now. And so a lot of men are just opting out of it completely. And I gotta be real, I get it. But when we talk about nation building for our people, we have to reconsider some things. As a matter of fact, the pro-black perspective says, I'm saying ideally, this is the pro-black perspective, for a nation building marriage, we should marry around improving our health, wealth, and life. Now I get what you're saying. My apologies. Now I get what you're saying. And that, what you just said, I think is correct. Right? I talked about that the first episode of the year, right? The 3 markets that we all should be making the most of. And now I understand what you mean, Oni, and I agree with that. What marriage should be for us is in view of trying to build a nation, it should be about your health, your wealth, right? And just life period, right? It should be about bettering those things. And that's true. So let's leave that there for now as I continue. But it's something to think about. That because of the, as KW Don 7 said earlier, because there's no rites of passage and courtship and stuff like that, you have a lot of people out here who are engaging in things like marriage who really don't have no business engaging in marriage. The way it is right now and the participants that are out here in it, it's destruction. It is not building anything, right? To continue, the fear of marrying from strange or distant Igbo communities stems from a practical concern over reciprocal relationships that cannot be adequately cultivated. The woman's family cannot easily monitor the marriage, will not be as familiar with and involved in the lives of the children produced, and may not therefore benefit as those children later become important resources. The husband's family will not be able to depend on their affines to contribute support for the children, and will find it difficult to appeal to affines for help in stabilizing the marriage or assisting in family problems. Very few Igbos contemplate marrying from other ethnic groups, but in today's more fluid and urbanized Nigeria, many young Igbos from distant communities meet while they attend school, work, or seek business opportunities, and romantic relationships often evolve into marriage proposals. When Igbo couples from communities separated by tens and sometimes hundreds of miles decide to get married, their families find these proposed unions problematic. When two people from distant Igbo communities decide to marry, their respective families often try to talk them out of it. Very interesting. All of the intra-Igbo stereotypes are deployed to convince the couple of the inauspicious nature of the marriage, calling the people of various areas cannibals, arrogant and selfish, criminals, primitive, etc. For every Igbo group that one is not supposed to marry, there is a stereotype that is invoked to show why marrying such people is dangerous or defiling. The marshalling of prejudices and stereotypes is meant to persuade young people to marry from communities with whom they can more assuredly have effective affinal relations. That's a real funny thing to do, right? Even within the Igbo groups, there's a tribalism, right? It seems that it is more often the woman's people and the man's who reject a partner from a distance. They have more to lose because the woman and any children she produces will reside in her husband's home. To discourage a marriage, a young man or his delegation can be repeatedly put off as they come to negotiate their bride wealth and their potential affines. The woman's people are polite, but always find one excuse or another to slow and frustrate the negotiations. Sometimes the man will give up, or the woman will withdraw from the arrangement, telling her suitor she is no longer interested. But families and communities do not always win these battles. A young couple insistent about getting married can often outlast their elders. Most young people still marry from close to home, but the numbers of marriages that cross traditional intra-Igbo cultural divides are growing, and the acceptability of such marriages is increasing. In part, this is because Igbo people are recognizing the potential benefits of taking advantage of affinal ties that reach across wider distances in Nigerian society. However, it is also a capitulation to the changing conception of what a marriage should be. For example, the increasing acceptance of conjugality, intimacy, and love as the basis for marriage. This brings us to a section of paper called Osu and Romantic Love. I see in the chat room we have Titums and Kruma, aka Baku, saying what up. Titums, what's your family background? I mean, what's your family background? I'm pretty sure it's continental. Is it Nigerian? I don't remember. Right? So Osu and Romantic Love. One of the most popular video films produced in recent years by the country's burgeoning film industry is Taboo, the story of a young Igbo woman from a royal family who falls in love with an Osu. Osu are the descendants of ritual slaves in Igbo society, people who were enslaved to traditional Igbo religious shrines as a punishment or act of redemption for having committed some abomination, such as murder. Has anyone ever seen this movie before? I know there's folks out here who love African films. I do too, but I've only seen a few of them, and honestly, it was back in the late 90s when it was like a big deal to find African films on street corners in the New York area. You guys who live in New York, do you remember when dudes were selling CDs and all that kind of stuff in the little corners and stuff? You could have bought like African films, right? The typical stereotype of Osu is that he or she is polluting and dangerous. People feared the Osu even as they despised them. Once a person was made an Osu, his or her descendants inherited his ritual duties and stigma. With the spread of Christianity, the vast majority of contemporary Igbo villages have abandoned or destroyed the shrines of traditional Igbo religion. You see, that pisses me off. Indeed, under Nigerian law, Osu status was abolished decades ago. But the descendants of these ritual slaves remain highly stigmatized. In their natal village communities, Osu communities, to live in separate hamlets lest they pollute the Diala, or the freeborn. Perhaps the most important and surely the most enforced of the restrictions on Osu in contemporary society is that they are forbidden from marrying non-Osu. Not surprisingly, Osu were among the first Igbos to embrace Christianity during the colonial period. It offered them an escape from their stigmatized status. As the first Christian converts, they were also among the first to accept Western education. A legacy of their early receptivity to change is that many Osu are now relatively affluent and urbanized. The possibility that Osu and Diala can meet and fall in love is very real in contemporary Nigeria, given the relative anonymity offered by the city, the mixing of young people fostered by higher education, and the emerging model of romantic love. But the proposal of marriage again brings Osu status to the fore. Igbo marriages still inevitably involve a return to the village for the traditional ceremony and all of the interfamilial negotiations that precede it. It is impossible to hide one's Osu status during marriage arrangements. If I'm not mistaken, do you guys remember this, or am I making this up in my mind? In the article that catapulted Breaking Brown, Yvette Carnell, and led to, the increased visibility of ADOS and the creation of FPA, in that article where the writer's grandfather used to be a slave dealer, or a dealer of enslaved Africans. Am I mistaken, or was those people Osu? Were those folks Osu? Y'all let me know. Kevin Care42 says Fulton and Nostrand. Yeah, all along Nostrand back in the days. For those who don't know, there's a street in Brooklyn called Nostrand Avenue. All along Nostrand and Church, Nostrand and Flatbush, where the junction, all along Nostrand, you could have found late 90s. You could have found African films on tape, right? All along Nostrand Avenue. Taboo is a story about an Osu Diallo love affair and the social consequences as the couple confronts entrenched prejudices. The daughter of an Igbo traditional ruler, an Easy, and a young Osu man meet and fall in love at a university. Not surprisingly, the girl's father vehemently rejects the idea that his daughter could marry an Osu. In a twisting plot, the young Osu man ends up saving the Easy from a fatal palace coup engineered by one of his disgruntled wives. The Osu becomes a hero, but he does not get the girl because he is killed in another valiant confrontation with evildoers, and the Easy's daughter is left to mourn her lover. Spoilers, I guess. God damn. In real life, few Osu Diallo love affairs can progress to marriage. But films like Taboo both represent and reinforce a growing Igbo fascination with romantic love. They contribute to a incipient romanticization of the individual as an autonomous and valued entity in his or her own right. The sympathies of the audience are clearly with the lovers, especially with the young Osu man and his heroic deeds. In Taboo, even if love does not conquer all, it is depicted as a space of freedom from the shackles of traditional social conventions. Osu, as tragic hero, represents the valorization of individuality. He who is least free is ironically most admired in his autonomy. Many young and educated Igbos have seen Taboo. Still more know about the dilemmas of Osu who fall in love with Diallo. Nigerian newspapers and magazines regularly feature letters, editorials, and short stories about the legacy of the Osu stigma. Yet Igbos with whom I discussed the film or the Osu issue more widely said that they could not marry or imagine their child marrying an Osu. Even those who maintain that they had completely adopted a modern model of romantic love as the basis for marriage, and who rejected the Osu stigma as unchristian or otherwise ethically untenable, admitted that they would shrink at the idea of marriage to an Osu. What are you guys' thoughts about this stigma? Right, or the stigmatization of a group is that it's so strong that most people wouldn't cross it. What? I mean, we have that. I mean, let's speak real now. Let's speak truth to power. We have instances of that all the time, where, like in the Caribbean, you'll have certain groups who wouldn't marry Haitians. Right? What do you think about that? How can we get rid of this or not? Many young and educated Igbo, just read that, right? Much as Taboo and many other cultural productions seem to promote notions of romantic love and valorize individuality, they also inevitably evoke the contested nature of the social transformations underway in Igbo society. Contemporary Igbo marriages are in fact neither traditional nor modern, though Igbo people do often talk about contests that surround the construction of contemporary models of marriage as if they were a battle between the old and the new. This brings us to a section of the paper called Igbo Marriage Ceremonies. I tell you what, I've asked several questions. Let's see if some answers will roll in. In the meantime, let me take a quick station ID break. I'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
So let's keep it all the way real. When talking about nation building, we can't afford all of this type of stuff. When we're talking about nation building, we cannot afford this type of foolery. We got to be more on point in this. We just can't accept it. All right. But to continue with the paper, I hope you guys are enjoying the paper. Make sure you guys hit the like button for me. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified when I'm on. By the way, I want to thank the folks. I don't have the names in front of me right now, but I want to thank all the new subscribers I've had in the last few days. Thanks to all of you who have become a subscriber to the show. Your presence here is welcome. So let's talk about Igbo marriage ceremonies. Terms like traditional and modern with regard to cultural phenomena such as marriage oversimplify complexities that require exploration. However, it is sometimes the case that local people themselves use terms like traditional and modern to talk about and make sense of their lives. This is certainly true with regard to how Igbos talk about marriage ceremonies. People clearly distinguish between what they call the traditional wedding and the modern, quote-unquote, white or Christian wedding. The difference in the ceremonies and the talk about the ceremonies index different conceptions of what marriage is, what gender roles should be, and what it means to be a family. Most Igbos aspire to have both traditional and Christian wedding ceremonies. But the traditional ceremony is essential and obligatory. The Christian ceremony is more of a luxury and a symbol of wealth and progressiveness. No one dares neglect or evade the traditional ceremony, but to perform it means, in the eyes of relatives, the friends, and the wider community, that the couple is not married. The traditional ceremony is for and about the couple's lineage and their communities as much or more than it is for and about the man and the woman who are married. The series of exchanges and that establishes and legitimizes a marriage is talked about in terms of obligations and rights. The bride's family and her kin have rights that must be observed by the groom, and his kin as obligations. The transfer of a woman's reproductive capacity from her patrilineage to her husband's through the payment of bride wealth involves much more than a simple economic transaction. The traditional wedding ceremony establishes an enduring social alliance, albeit one potentially fraught with antagonisms, and a lifelong series of exchanges, again spoken about as rights and obligations, between the extended families of the husband and his wife. The center of that alliance is a mutual interest in the children produced in the marriage. The ceremony emphasizes traditional Igbo values about the extended family. The event involves a huge gathering of the extended families, villages, communities, and other friends and associates of the bride and groom and their families. Most guests wear traditional clothing, and the marrying couple always does. Music, dance, performances, and oratory reflect traditional styles. Elders urge the couple to live in peace, but also instruct them to be mindful of their obligations to their kin and affiant. Similarly, those in attendance are urged to lend a helping hand to the new union. The two joining families speak to and counsel each other, as well as the people. The ceremony is about the creation of affinal ties, as well as about the establishment of a marriage. Much attention is paid to the anticipated fertility of the couple. Prayers are spoken asking God to grant the couple many offspring, often requesting that at the 1-year anniversary of the ceremony, there be a child to mark the consummation of the marriage. A striking emphasis in the ceremony is on the collective interests of all present and the success and fruits, mainly the children, of the marriage. Although they knew it before, the couple is clearly reminded in the ceremony that they are not in their marriage alone. The Christian ceremony, in contrast, is officiated in a church, often in town, by a single minister or priest who serves to sanctify the marriage in the eyes of God. Following a Western model, the bride dresses in a white wedding gown, and the groom in a tuxedo or dark suit. Bridesmaids, who are often urban or school friends, as well as relatives, dress in matching outfits, and the groom is assisted by his best man and perhaps some ushers. The ceremony is followed by a reception at which there are formal toast, a very ceremonial cutting of a wedding cake, and of course much eating, drinking, and dancing. The message of the Christian ceremony is that the success of the marriage depends above all on the individual couple and on their relationship with each other and with God. Families are, of course, asked to assist in supporting the marriage, but the ceremony very much reinforces a conjugal, companionate model of marriage, with the couple as partners in a particularly individual kind of project. Parenthood and gender roles. Patterns of courtship and the growing symbolic importance of Christian wedding ceremonies mark significant changes in Igbo conceptions of what marriage is. Marriage relationships have also changed. Polygamy, once fairly common, is exceedingly rare among the younger generation. Within monogamous marriages, the strength of the conjugal relationship has grown vis-a-vis other family and community relationships. Young couples are far more likely than their parents to share one bedroom, eat together, maintain a single household budget, and live in town away from the compound of the husband's family, which is the traditional place of residence. The quality of a young couple's personal relationship, including the degree of emotional intimacy and sexual compatibility, is more likely to figure in their private assessment of the state of their marriage than was the case of their parents. But once a couple is married, and certainly once they have children, the importance of their personal relationship as a measure of the state of the marriage recedes in comparison to the tremendous emphasis on successful parenthood. The place of children in adult relationships is central to the understanding the whole social fabric of African societies. Let me read that again. The place of children in adult relationships is central to understanding the whole social fabric of African societies. As Fortes argued, it is quote-unquote parenthood that is the primary value associated with the idea of family in West Africa. Parenthood, Fortes in 1978 says, is regarded as a sine qua non for the attainment of the full development of the complete person in which to which all aspire. Having children is not only a means to individual personhood, but also fulfillment of one's obligation to kin and community. And to you guys listening live, I'll ask a question. This is if you have children, if you intend to have children, etc. Do you guys look at children in that way? Do you guys view having children as a fulfillment of one's obligation to kin and community? You definitely have to have children if you want a nation built, right? The continuing importance of parenthood should not obscure the fact that, like marriage, fertility is increasingly seen as an arena in which individuals can exercise choice. Knowledge and use of modern contraceptives, while far from ubiquitous, have expanded significantly, with over 35% of married couples in Upakala reporting that they had used a modern family planning method at some time. Husbands and wives do not always agree about when another child should be conceived, or even necessarily over how many children they should have. The increasing importance of the conjugal relationship in and of itself has created a cultural space for marital negotiations over fertility. No doubt, the trend is for young Igbo couples to have fewer children than their parents and grandparents had. But fertility remains highly valued, in large part because of the continuing importance of kinship networks in Nigeria. Couples that do not have children in the early years of marriage face certain scrutiny from their relatives and become the object of gossip. So obviously this is something that's true of Africans all across the globe. Long-term childlessness is usually a sign of infertility, because among all Igbo couples, because almost all Igbo couples wish to conform to the expectation of parenthood soon after marriage. Few problems are more threatening to a marriage than infertility. While infertility is more often blamed on the woman, both men and women can be socially excused for terminating a marriage with an infertile partner. But most couples go to extreme lengths to try to get pregnant. Some of the most painful life stories I collected deal with the efforts to overcome infertility. Once a couple has children, particularly a son, there are few socially acceptable reasons for them to divorce. This is interesting. Once a couple has children, particularly a son, there are few socially acceptable reasons for them to divorce. Disputes and incompatibilities that lead to fissures and separations are almost always mediated by extended family members on both sides, who see it as their duty to bring the couple back together. You see, we don't have this, really. Right? We really don't have this. Right? Deteriorating personal relationships are not generally sufficient grounds for divorce. A married woman with children will be on much firmer ground in complaining about her marriage if she can show that her husband fails to support his children and his children than if she complains of a personal problem with him. Which, in my opinion, that's how it should be. That brings us to gender and marital fidelity. I see there's some movement in the chat room. KW7 says the birth rate should be a replacement at a minimum. The birth rate should be a replacement at a minimum. KW7, you want to expand on that thought a little bit? I think I know what you mean, but just expand on that a little bit further for me, if you don't mind. So gender and marital fidelity. The division of gender roles remains quite pronounced in Igbo society, even before marriage. But once a couple is married, the division of gender roles is more strictly reinforced and dramatically different standards of behavior apply to husband and wife. Quick question for the chat room. What's your thoughts on gender roles? I saw recently on Twitter some complaining going on about gender roles. What do you think about gender roles? And if you had to define gender roles for men and women, what would it be? What would those definitions look like? Let me know, and I will read it off live on air. A strikingly more patriarchal gender dynamic emerges after marriage. The arena of sexuality provides perhaps the most salient example. During courtship, when the couple's relationship is based primarily on their personal and emotional relationship to each other, both persons feel an obligation to fidelity. While this obligation is not necessarily observed, an individual who cheats on his or her lover and gets caught knows there's a good chance that the other person will end the relationship. It is generally thought that young married Igbo men cheat more than young unmarried Igbo women. But most important, the sanctions each face are similar. Infidelity during courtship is a personal violation, and the consequences have to be negotiated between the individuals involved. Igbo men can and will have extramarital affairs. That Igbo men can and will have extramarital affairs is widely accepted. A man who cheats on his wife risks little social condemnation, assuming he continues to provide for his wife and children and does not do something foolish like propose to leave his wife for his lover. In fact, among Igbo men, there's a certain pride in taking lovers. Being able to have lovers is a sign of continuing masculine prowess and of economic success, because increasingly, women expect their lovers to perform economically as well as sexually. In the following example, the man's name and other identifying characteristics have been altered to assure anonymity. Oni Tase is 47 years, no, I'm not, I'm just bullshitting. So, John Ezigbo is 47 years old. A married father of 5. He runs 2 successful businesses. Almost every night, John leaves his house about 5 p.m., bound for Umahia Club, where he plays an hour of tennis, drinks a few beers, and socializes with other well-to-do Igbo men, members of the club. Many evenings after a post-game beer, he drives off to pick up a young lady friend whom he brings back to entertain, offering her drinks and something to eat from the club's kitchen. Though spouses are honorary club members, John knows that he and his girlfriend will not encounter any wives at the club, or women who might report him to his own spouse. There is an unwritten rule among the men that wives are not welcome, except on specifically designated occasions. The club is a safe place to bring a girlfriend. John's girlfriends are typically secondary school graduates who are either attending one of several tertiary institutions in town or are employed in some kind of urban office or business. All of them are educated modern girls who wear makeup, straighten their hair, only to style it again, sport fashionable clothes, and see school and the city as means to a better life. John is one of the more blatant philanderers in the club. It is rare to see the same lady in his company for more than a few weeks. Other men keep much more steady lovers. Many do not bring their girlfriends to the club at all, preferring to keep their sexual affairs more private. But keeping women outside of marriage is accepted, indeed socially rewarded, among elite Igbo men. Pretty young ladies are brought to the club proudly. Most men want their male pairs to know that they have extramarital affairs. They tell each other stories about sexual conquest, sometimes including the graphic details of sounds, positions, and styles. No doubt there is much male bravado in all of this. Side note here. As a grown man, as a big grown man, I've never really had conversations with other grown men. I've never had conversations with other grown men about what women look like and do in bed and sound like in bed. Never. It's real weird. It's real weird. KW Don in the chat room comes back and says the birth rate should be at replacement at minimum, meaning at least 2 offspring per couple. At replacement, okay, yeah. Get it, got it. Perhaps not surprisingly, given the economic inequalities in Nigerian society, the ability to have new women is a marker of economic status as well as virility. Men who have cars belong to social clubs, rent expensive hotel rooms, and have the resources to give women substantial amounts of money and gifts are by far the more desirable married lovers. Such attributes define sugar daddies, quote-unquote sugar daddies. Much as men expect sexual intercourse and an attractive partner to display to their peers, the young women require and exact from their married lovers many kinds of assistance. On dates or outings, young ladies pressure their sugar daddies to buy them the most expensive beer, order them special food, and reserve rooms at the fanciest hotels. They routinely ask for money to pay school fees and start businesses, help their parents, or assist with rent. They also expect their men to buy them gifts of clothes, shoes, jewelry, and even electronics and appliances. So when we talk about health, wealth, and life, these guys are invested in marriage for health, wealth, and life to share out here with their, the little side sweeties, right? The little cupcaking events. Most men like to see themselves as masters of these extramarital relationships, in charge of their lovers, to whom they sometimes refer as handbags, in the same way that they want to be in charge of their married households and their money. Yet even men acknowledge, perhaps unwittingly, the degree to which young female lovers have some control over relationships with their sugar daddies. Men often complain that their young women bled them, manipulating them for money, and even ironically for sex. Men's use of terms like quote-unquote bleeding and quote-unquote razor blade in reference to the young women in extramarital sexual relationships have multiple meanings. First is the clear reference in economic extraction. Razor blades cut men to bleed them of their money. Second, and perhaps more interesting, is an implication that women are extracting sex, that somehow, even as men view themselves as the aggressors in sexual relationships, they see women as insatiable, as reservoirs of bottomless and dangerous sexual desires that can wear men out. Hey, maybe it's time to go to Nigeria or something. You know what I mean? Maybe it's time to go to Nigeria. Finally, the terms are often used in reference to romance and love, implying that women are able to manipulate men's hearts to get their own sexual, and material gratification. Much as many men eschew the idea that they are vulnerable to love, they participate in a common countervailing discourse in Igbo society that women have quote-unquote love medicine and are capable of manipulating men sexually and romantically. Hey, one of you guys in the chat room, if you don't mind, look up round trip. In fact, look up one-way ticket to Nigeria and tell me what that price is. Post it in the chat room. One-way ticket to Nigeria. So quote-unquote razor blades and quote-unquote handbags imply very different notions of women's agency. One active and dangerous, the other passive and under control. Both objectifying and neither particularly attractive. But these contrasting images reflect well the conflicting representations of women in Igbo men's discourse. And each is, to some extent, representative of the real status of unmarried young women in their sexual relationships with sugar daddies. They are clearly used by men, yet they clearly also use men. Extramarital sexual relationships pose increasing risks given the spread of HIV and AIDS in Nigeria. This paper has taken a turn, hasn't it? When I first arrived in Nigeria from 1982 to 1992, few of the men I knew took seriously the risk of AIDS. Most men believed they were not personally at risk because they viewed AIDS as a gay disease, a white man's disease, or something that one could only contract from prostitutes. Among these same men, other sexually transmitted diseases were dismissed as not too serious. Easy access to over-the-counter antibiotics led to widespread self-medication for STDs, no doubt increasing drug-resistant strains. During my field work from 1995 to 1997, little had changed about people's perceptions of their own risk for contracting HIV/AIDS, and many men in extramarital sexual relationships still preferred to rely on their girlfriends to prevent or terminate pregnancy, rather than use pleasure-inhibiting condoms. While young women were certainly concerned about preventing pregnancy and about the possible effects on their own future, fertility of contracting STDs, even among women who had such concerns, negotiating condom use proved difficult in economically unequal relationships. During my most recent visit to Nigeria in 2000, I noticed the beginnings of a change in the attitude towards AIDS. The change was due in part to widespread publicity in the wake of Nigeria's 1999 Sero prevalence survey, indicating that 5.4% of adult Nigerians were estimated to be HIV positive. But probably more important, people now knew or had heard about individuals with HIV or AIDS. So, you remember when I asked y'all to look up that one-way ticket to Nigeria? Let's scratch that. All right, let's scratch it. Let's scratch that. Although, you can put the price down for a round-trip ticket, you know, in case the numbers change, you know, stuff like that. Anyway, this brings us to a section of paper called The Rules of Infidelity. Even as married men flaunt their beautiful young lovers to their male peers, and these young lovers show off the benefits of catching a rich sugar daddy, there are some lines that neither married men nor their unmarried lovers risk crossing. Lines drawn in relation to cultural conceptions of marriage and family. Much as men would like to believe that their wives are powerless in this regard, married women actually have rights that few men and few of their lovers dare to threaten. Igbo women know that married Igbo men often seek outside women. Many married women may even know that their own husbands do so. It's often a source of intense marital conflict. But as unfair as the system seems to be for married women, husbands must nonetheless observe some widely accepted rules. Number one, try not to put one's wife in a position to have to confront one's infidelity directly. Two, do not jeopardize the family's well-being by spending too much time or money on a lover. And three, do not ever let the outside woman threaten the enduring nature of the marriage. These rules are crazy as hell. Thus, while elite men are socially rewarded for their extramarital sexual prowess, they can be criticized and reined in if they go too far. The very pairs who reward a man for traveling with a quote-unquote handbag will rise collectively to censor him if he threatens his marriage by being too careless in his extramarital liaisons. In practice, one's young lover can phone at work, but never at home. Sexual liaisons should have place in hotels. Right? Sexual liaisons should take place in hotels, not in a man's house while the wife is away. Young female lovers must know when to be scarce. They should never challenge a wife in a jealous and possessive stare down. They can never expect their sugar daddies to leave their wives to marry them. They should not get pregnant, and they certainly cannot have a baby. Is this the Mac lessons I'm reading? Is this The one of these Tariq Nasheed books or some shit like that? KW Don says it's about $800 or $900, $800 or $900 Canadian dollars. Okay. Okay. Doable, right? But yeah, I mean, these rules here are like, wow. When a woman discovers that her husband has a lover, it often leads to terrible rows, especially among younger couples for whom the basis for marriage includes a notion of love and intimacy. Ah, okay. Young Igbo women want and expect their husbands to be faithful. To keep their husbands in line, they deploy discourses about love, manipulate their husbands' affections, and call upon Christian concepts of monogamy and fidelity. In addition, as women in urban areas become employed outside the home, they control economic resources that give them some leverage in their marriages. But overall, women's increasing participation in the formal economy has not dramatically changed the division of labor and the dynamics of power in the household. To the extent that women do less domestic work and childcare because of employment, those tasks tend to be taken on by maids and nannies rather than husbands and fathers. Even among the most elite women, the role of wife and mother remains highly valued. Married women who are doctors, lawyers, and chiefs almost universally insert Mrs. into their titles. In the social commentary that I heard, much more common than the conclusion that women's increasing incomes and opportunities would lead them to be able to limit men's infidelities was a belief that women were now increasingly engaging in their own extramarital affairs. Nonetheless, in contemporary Igbo-speaking Nigeria, extramarital sexuality is still largely conceived of as a contest between husbands who want and think they are entitled to extramarital sexual relationships, and wives who mostly want to rein in their husbands' extramarital activities. In many cases, the women's struggles, combined with the strength of conjugal relationships, are effective. Not all Igbo men cheat on their wives. Finally, they say this, right? But women find it difficult to appeal to their kinfolk and affines for help and can expect little sympathy from society if they leave a man because he has had sex outside the marriage, especially if he has been relatively discreet. That's a hell of a statement. So when you hear young Nigerian women saying they refuse to marry a Nigerian man, right? It has to be due to stuff like this. What's wild is they will go and marry a white man. That's just why. In contrast, a woman who has sex outside marriage risks heavy sanctions, though probably less so in urban elite circles than in a traditional village setting. Few people would fault a man for leaving a cheating wife, and it would not surprise people to learn that a husband beat his wife for such an offense, even if he did not divorce her. Even when a woman cheats on her husband, the extended families will try to keep the marriage together. But a philandering woman receives much less sympathy than a philandering man. Interestingly, women's infidelities are much less grave before marriage. In contemporary Igbo land, young women are relatively free in their premarital sexual lives. I observed numerous instances where premarital relationships survived a woman getting involved with another man. In contrast, men seem to face stiffer penalties for infidelity before marriage because women had greater control over men's access to sexual intercourse. So what explains this paradoxical situation where women seem to have more sexual autonomy and greater control over their male partner's behavior before marriage? I suggest that it is the continuing importance of kinship ties, the importance of children in reproducing kinship networks, the centrality of parenthood in the Igbo construction of marriage that account for the contrast between gender roles in courtship and marriage. While both courtship and marriage are being transformed by processes of social change in Nigeria, courtship can afford to be explicitly about love and emotional intimacy because it plays no real role in social reproduction. The wide array of corporate and individual actors who have a stake in a marriage are not much interested in premarital relationships. Courtship, where the relationship is negotiated based on interpersonal dynamics that privilege increasingly widely accepted ideas about individual choice, emotional intimacy, and romance, women are in a strong position. Once married, the personal lives of a couple become, in a sense, community property. And in a patrilineal society, where the children belong to the husband's people, a woman who breaks off her marriage, whether by cheating on her husband or challenging his own infidelity, risks losing her children, losing them for her own lineage too. Wow. Wow. That's deep. How many of you are open to relationships and marriage that's community property? How many of you are open to a relationship, say a marriage, that is community property, meaning that extended family, right, can interject and have some say in the goings on of your marriage? How many of you are good with that? You know, the old joke in the West is about the mother-in-law who's overbearing, right? How many of you are cool with that type of relationship? So we've reached a conclusion of the paper. And Kevin Care 42 says, no bueno. Disaster. Right? But again, the question, the idea links back to something important. Traditionally, Africans practice community. They practice collective. So it stands to reason that marriage will also be a collective type thing. When we go away from that, are we hurting ourselves? Are we denying ourselves, building a real powerful African nation when we go against our tradition? If we are people who traditionally looked at ourselves as a group, and when we started looking at ourselves as individuals, that, a part of that is what led to the enslavement of Africans and the kidnapping of enslaved Africans to the US, when folks started thinking about I and me, right? Because there's a funny dynamic about community. If you start to break down communities according to your community versus their community, there's a tribalism there, even though it's one community, right? But it also leads to the sellout type of mindset where, well, I'll sell your community, I'll sell your people because your people ain't really quite my people, right? So the question becomes, are we practicing this westernized idea of relationships that's kind of more individualistic? It's about me, it's about you, and it's about us coming together in union versus, this idea that the community, your family, her family, right? They greenlight this relationship. And then they have a say in the affairs of what's going on. They help to raise the children. We know the children are part of a nation, right? Is that really what we're supposed to be doing? Again, the Western idea is that the mother-in-law is overbearing. She's a nag. I want to punch her from here to the moon or some shit like that, right? But is it really the case that we're supposed to embrace those folks and those folks can become intercessors in our relationships when things go bad and when our spouse doesn't show reason? How many of you have been in relationships where you wish someone would talk sense into your partner? Something to think about. Think about that. Make sure you guys hit the like button if you're new here. Click subscribe. Click the bell as well to be notified when I'm on again. Right? I'm going to take a quick station ID break, but that's something to think about. Right? Perhaps we're doing it all wrong as black folks because we're doing it in another people's way. All right, I'll be back on the other side to read the conclusion of this paper. Just hang in there a minute.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Also, make sure to check out the Queen's Council podcast as well. The Queen's Council is putting out some interesting shows these days. If you check out any of the shows on YouTube, make sure to drop a comment. I think most hosts like myself like the interactions on these episode videos. So make sure, hit them a comment. I'm sure they'd like to respond and have dialogue with you guys as well. Also, I want to remind everyone that we do have a Discord server. I want to give you guys the link, 7-day link. Make sure you guys subscribe. Make sure you guys join the Discord. We're working on African-centered curriculum. Even this paper plays into concepts of African-centered curriculum by discussing gender roles, discussing rites of passage, and whatnot. So make sure you guys check out the Discord. And if you just like the podcast, you want to hang out, by all means, join the Discord and let us know that you're here to support you're there to support the Discord, as well as just to support the podcast. All right. So let's finish this paper up. Conclusion: the gender dynamics that characterize premarital, marital, and extramarital relationships in Igbo-speaking Nigeria mark significant changes from the past. Courtship and premarital sexuality are reluctantly recent phenomena. In traditional Igbo society, female chastity before marriage was highly valued, and opportunities for young women to experience sexual intercourse before marriage were severely limited by the early marriage age. Yeah. They got married so young that you couldn't really, there was no period of time really to be getting it in with these children. The same social transformations that have led to later marriage age for women, for example, formal schooling, urban migration and employment, and aspirations for upward social mobility, have also contributed to the proliferation and acceptance of premarital sexuality. Ashendu, in 1965, notes that, quote, increasing acculturation, the long period of schooling, the separation of girls from their mothers, the rejection of traditional sanctions by educated girls and boys, and the rising age of marriage have made the girl who is a virgin at marriage into a social curiosity. While Igbo parents and elders still say that young women should stay virgins until marriage, almost no one expects this to be the case. And young women do not harm their chances for attracting a mate by engaging in premarital sexual relations. Keep that in mind, fellas. Right? Some of you, not really the younger guys, but some of you are still on that old virgin BS, right? In fact, as Little in 1979 and Harel Bon in 1975 observed in Sierra Leone, young women may risk losing potential suitors if they try to remain chaste. As one of Harel Bon's informants noted, quote, in order to get a good husband, you have to be good, but you also have to be careful not to be too good. Put that on a t-shirt, underdog, right? In order to get a husband, you have to be good, but you also have to be careful not to be too good. Talk about African game right there. The general acceptability of premarital sexual relations must be understood in the context of the changing relationship between sexuality and procreation. As Mayer, 1969, concluded several decades ago, quote, the key to the attitude of Africans towards this subject is that the religious values associated with sex are concentrated on procreation and not on sexual activity as such, end of quote. Because young Igbo women are able to engage in premarital sexual relations without necessarily having a child, families and communities are not overly concerned about young women's chastity per se. Not surprisingly, a premarital pregnancy brings much greater concern, and young Igbo women commonly resort to unsafe illegal abortions to terminate unwanted premarital pregnancies. The premarital sexual relationships and processes of courtship are negotiated between individual men and women, based largely on the quality of their personal relationships. Affords women considerable power. While family approval for a marriage is still important, issues of compatible social status are still implicit. Man who expects to woo a woman into marriage must be ready to perform as a romantic lover. He must win her heart, not just pay her bride price. Given the changes that commonly take place in gender dynamics after marriage and the achievement of parenthood, it is worth asking whether Igbo men are as committed as Igbo women to the idea of romantic love as the basis for marriage. Certainly young Igbo women were well aware that Igbo men tried to manipulate women's affections in order to get sex. Some married women I spoke to who were unhappy with their philandering husbands wondered out loud whether their husbands had ever really loved them. Such sentiments were echoed by the South African woman that Van der Vliet in 1991 studied. One of them is quoted, quote, when he wants to marry you, he tells you all sorts of lies. You'll be my equal. You'll be faithful. Oh, you'll be my equal. I'll be faithful to you. And all that. And you think, this is the man I must marry. The minute you put the rings on, the trouble starts. What you are expected to do when you are a woman is to be a housewife and give birth to children. In fact, that's the main thing when they marry. They always think about how this woman will give birth to many children for the sake of our family name and to increase the whole clan. You know, I was talking to a lady recently who had the same sentiment. Not Igbo, right? But, you know, Caribbean descent, but had the same feeling that all men want is just to have this, you know, still this concept of naked, barefoot and pregnant, right? Sweating over a pot to make sure you eat. And in another conversation I had very recently, you have women out here who are dealing with men who think that the woman's time is supposed to be dedicated to all things involving him. So don't talk to your mama, don't talk to your sister, don't talk to your brother, don't listen to a podcast, don't do anything except wash my clothes, cook, fold my clothes, clean the house, take care of the child. All right? I think that's something that we gotta really get off of. We're in a different time. I hate to put it like this, but women have tasted that freedom. Women have tasted more. They know that there's more out there in the world. I mean, they always knew it, but now many of them, if not all, or most of them, have experienced it. And you can't come along with that thinking that all she's going to do is be a housewife and give birth to children. If you agree with me, say so in the chat room. If you disagree, say so as well. And we could have a discussion on that. All right? To continue. While I know from countless conversations with Igbo men that they do indeed manipulate women's affections using proclamations of love to secure sexual access, it was my impression that men were often generally caught up in romance. Certainly most young men openly stated that being in love was an important criterion for selecting a spouse. It is doubtful that most men consciously lied about their feelings to secure the acceptance of a marriage proposal. The transformation that occurs in gender dynamics after marriage and parenthood, and the propensity and social acceptability of men's involvement in extramarital sexual relationships must be understood in other terms. To hear Igbo men tell it, access to multiple women is part of their African heritage. Quote, it is our culture. End of quote. Many men said, and quote unquote, it cannot be changed. Implicit in men's version of traditional culture is the belief that women do not and have never had the same rights of extramarital sexual access. So the Chendu's 1965 study of concubinage in traditional Igbo society suggests that in the past, women also had institutionalized access to lovers. Indeed, that's something to read about. Indeed, he places his account on the institutions of sexual access in the context of a larger claim that Igbo society was characterized by gender equality. Quote, in Igbo society, in which the opportunities for status advancement are almost equally open to men and women, and the socioeconomic status of the sexes is approaching near equality, it is difficult, if not impossible, to maintain a double standard of morality. In Igbo society, sex has become a potent weapon of aggression, utilized by either sex for the purpose of maintaining social equality and balance of power. It is a common experience of Igbo life for a wife or co-wives to bring the love affairs of a jealous husband to a dramatic end by a threat to contract a lower relationship. Sorry, a lover relationship. Okay. Wow, that's an interesting take. If you don't stop your shenanigans, we will be involved in our own shenanigans, right? In fact, Iko Imbara acts as a sex equalizer rather than as an instrument of male domination. Whether or not traditional Igbo society was largely gender equal, the fact that women could have institutionally sanctioned extramarital lovers suggests that contemporary Igbo men's notion of traditional culture is constructed to suit their present goals and desires. As Van der Vliet notes, quote, in the domain of gender politics, competing ideological constructions of traditional and modern marriage became valuable and contested resources. What is critical in the manipulation of these models is not whether they correspond with past realities, but whether people treat them as realities and whether they can use them to exercise political control and moral suasion over reluctant partners. Changes in gender dynamics that occur after marriage, including men's involvement in and sense of entitlement regarding extramarital sexual relations, must be understood in the context of the life course, taking into consideration the continuing centrality of parenthood and fertility in Igbo social organization. Despite long-standing predictions that the strength of corporate kin groups in Africa will wane with the establishment of Western forms, marriage and household organization, in Igbo society, as in much of Africa, the importance of kinship and allegiance to place of origin remains powerful. Parenthood and relatively high fertility are essential to the social reproduction of corporate kin groups, and considerable social pressure is exerted on people to marry, produce children, and fulfill their obligations to their extended families and communities. Lesage, in 1989, summarizes the continuing power of allegiance to corporate kin groups in sub-Saharan Africa and explains its importance in perpetuating the value of fertility. Reproductive regimes of sub-Saharan Africa are still strongly attached to forms of social control prevailing in societies that capitalize on corporate allegiance. Change has not been lacking, though. The privatization of land ownership, the growth of the wage sector, urbanization, or external cultural influences all have altered the landscape. But even when it comes to the appropriation of a plot or to securing a job in the wage sector, the reliance on corporate kinship groups or other particularistic networks reemerges with full force. Life is not easy, both in urban and rural environments, and support from others is always wanted. Also, the imponderabilia of political life associated with the difficult process of nation building and the extra stress produced by the current economic crisis accentuated the importance of reliance upon and allegiance to trustworthy solidarity networks. That's a good point there. In short, survival depends on quote-unquote investment in identity. The complement of such an investment is, of course, the enhancement of moral patronage and social control exerted by the protecting agencies. The utility of children, and especially their security function, is likely to remain high for decades to come, and as a consequence, any future fertility decline is likely to lose momentum at average parities around 4 or 5. As Jehoda in 1959 noted more than 40 years ago, quote, feelings of respect and dependence towards the family of origin have not weakened in proportion to the acceptance of new forms in other spheres. As Lesage in 1989, conclusions emphasize, kinship ties remain strong for practical and strategic social and economic reasons, as well as because of deeply entrenched sentiments. A powerful confluence of social and democratic changes in sub-Saharan Africa has contributed to changing the dynamics of courtship and marriage. Increasing education, urban migration and employment, the influence of widely circulating ideas about love and romance, and the related rise in the age of marriage have created a process of courtship that privileges individual choice and interpersonal emotions. In the Igbo case, this new pattern of courtship seems to provide women with relative equality in the arena of sexuality and mate selection. But the consequences for women in marriage are quite different and arguably less equal than in traditional Igbo society. Because fertility and parenthood remain the paramount values associated with family, married women are socially evaluated primarily in their role as mothers. Scholars have noted that transformations to modern marriages may have a deleterious effect on women's status. Most of these studies emphasize the increased economic dependence associated with women's transition from productive farmers and traders to housewives. Though many women try to negotiate a more companionate and gender-equal marriage, relationship drawing on modern cultural scripts for marriage, the enduring social importance of parenthood provides men powerful leverage in negotiating power within marriage based on more traditional scripts. And you know, that's what I was talking about a second ago in my examples. I know women who are going through it, right? We're trying to get more companionate, gender equal marriage relationships, right? But because of their role in parenthood, right? You know, these men that they're dealing with are grabbing more power, right? Using traditional ideas. And so these women are being kind of treated as second class, right? As servants, if you will. Problematic. To continue, social actors inevitably work to manipulate social resources, including concepts like traditional and modern, to achieve their goals. Processes of social and demographic transformation proceed partly under the influence of these actors and partly beyond their control. Changes in the construction of marriage and the nature of courtship in Igbo society can only be understood in the context of the complex historical patterns of social organization and new practices and ideas. The enduring importance of kinship in Igbo land and in Africa more generally is rooted in the reality of African political economies as well as in their associated moralities. Increasingly prevalent ideals about love and romance and about the value of individual autonomy and choice must respond and adjust to the continuing reliance on corporate groups based on family and community. In addition, the effects of these changes and adjustments may be distributed differently over the life course, such that Igbo women appear to be more freer in their premarital sexual lives than in their marriages. It is possible to imagine that ongoing social changes will strengthen women's positions in the household and weaken the influence of extended families, increasing female education and employment, urban migration, more exposure to Western images of marriage, and the growing popularity of quote-unquote born-again Christian churches that emphasize marital fidelity all could contribute to further transformations in gender roles. But as long as parenthood remains the primary value associated with marriage, and kinship ties remain so important for securing social resources in this patrilineal society, courtship and marriage will continue to produce dramatically different gender dynamics. And that there's the paper. That last line, let's chew on that for a second. But as long as parenthood remains the primary value associated with marriage, kinship ties remain so important for securing social resources. In this patrilineal society, courtship and marriage will continue to produce dramatically different gender dynamics. So again, when we talk nation building, which option do we follow? Which demonstration of marriage and courtship should we follow? Do we do ourselves a disservice following a more westernized idea of courtship and marriage? Or should we return to what is our original way of engaging one another? I mean, this is for Igbo people. I am not sure what it is for other groups. Right? So it would be interesting to cross-reference it with other groups in West Africa. Right? If there's no more questions about the paper, we'll end here. But I hope you got some insight into some West African traditions of courtship and marriage. Now, some people, again, with the mentality that we have, right? Some folks won't be for those rules, those little rules about extramarital affairs. And look, I'm not one to push that kind of talk anyway. You know, I joked about making a trip to Nigeria. How much is the cost again? Oh yeah, right. I joked about that earlier, but you know, really and truly, you want to be fully engaged with the person you're with, and the more prepared each person is in being engaged in that way, you know, courtship and marriage and stuff like that, the less chance or the less likelihood there is of people stepping up, right? And then having to create these rules about stepping up, because the rules are created to minimize embarrassment. They're created to kind of keep folks in check. And the reality of it is, all you got to really do is start to think about abundance. Think about the things we talked about at the start of the year: health, wealth, and relationships, right? If you're getting fulfillment and you're getting abundance in your relationships, then you don't need all these other rules. But because of how society is set up, where you have the haves and the have-nots, then you're going to have this kind of industry for so-called elites, even amongst these people, the Igbo, right? You're going to have elites who are going to take advantage of it because they have, and they can give to the have-nots. But when you work on abundance, and I'm not talking about just a few people have abundance, meaning the elite, when we all work on abundance, we cut down on a lot of the nonsense. Does everyone follow what I'm saying? If you follow what I'm saying, let me know. There is a question I have for you guys, unrelated to this paper. But if you follow what I just said, let me know. I have one question for you guys, unrelated to this paper. Y'all ready for the question? Who amongst you have seen Coming to America 2? I'm curious to know who amongst you has seen Coming to America 2. Give it a thumbs up if it was good, a thumbs down if it was bad, a question mark if you're unsure. All right? In the meantime, Kevin Care 42 says, that's why I say compatibility. Once both of you are on the same page, that is priceless, right? But I agree with you, Kevin Care 42, but I just want to say that, you know, I'm very sensitive about this concept of compatibility, meaning that it's all about how we feel and, you know, do we get along, and, you know, do we like the same stuff? Did we both like Coming to America 2, for example? I'm also about people understanding what we're really doing together. Like, what are we here for in this relationship? And for me, I've learned over the years that it's really about nation building. It's really about having children and making them stronger Africans who will then take up the mantle to build a stronger Africa. Right? That's what I think of when I think about marriage and this type of stuff. You're really building your nation and hoping to be in league with other couples who are also trying to build our nation, you know? So that's what I think about. In the chat room, KW Don 7 said, I just saw it before your broadcast. It was good. That's good to hear, KW Don 7. I heard some people kind of dumping on it. I suspect a lot of those folks weren't alive when the original came out, right? They weren't kids like I was at the time when the original came out, and who laughed their ass off at your boy. I forgot Eddie Murphy's character's Hakeem, right? Who, when Hakeem goes out on the fire escape in Queens, New York, and says, "Good morning, everybody," and the response is, "But F you, man. The hell you doing shouting this goddamn early in the morning?" Like, I think a lot of folks went around to see that, and just to see, you know, this different concept that was hilarious. This is when Eddie Murphy was in his bag as a comedian, by the way. So yeah, I'm glad to hear it's good. I'm thinking about watching it right after this broadcast. I even contemplated perhaps streaming it on the Discord. You know, but you know, I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. I want to give thanks to the Pro Black Perspective who was here before. That's Onitase. I want to give thanks to KW Don 7. I want to give thanks to Kevin Care 42. And Teetums was here for a minute. Teetums and Krumah was here for a minute. Thabo was here for a minute. I want to thank all you guys for being around, for hanging in there with me. I will have a new episode tomorrow night, that's for sure. Again, I'm doing this episode tonight. I had computer problems. And do you believe my computer has a symbol up here saying your device needs to restart to install updates? Hell no. So I appreciate all you guys. I'm glad to hear that Coming to America 2 was good. I'll check it out. Maybe I'll do a review of it as well, as a matter of fact. Anyway, guys, until next time, we've been here a while now. Until next time, this has been an episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.